90% of work processes completely break when teams grow past 50 people. And it's not because people get worse at their jobs. In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 specific mistakes that kill processes when you scale, and the 2-bucket framework that every successful company uses to avoid this. I'm also going to show you the 5-step process that we use with our clients that turn any broken workflow into something that actually gets better as your team grows. And stick around because the 3rd one alone could save your team hundreds of hours. I'm Josh, founder of Grid.io. We've helped hundreds of teams build scalable work management systems in Jira. What I'm about to show you will help you build processes that scale from 10 to 1,000 people without falling apart, even if your current system is a complete mess. Let's dive into mistake number 1, implementing the tool before defining the process. Instead of defining what success looks like, teams adopt a tool, they dive in, and they try to fit a square peg into a circle hole, and they keep changing and altering it because they never actually defined what working looks like in the first place. I see this with almost every single client. They come to be frustrated because their tool doesn't work, when the real problem is that they've never mapped out the process before building it. Mistake number 2 is that everyone creates their own system. There's no alignment on an organizational level or a team level on what a process should be. Everyone has their own version of work tracking. Everything is siloed and separate rather than aligning to one thing that everybody's working towards. And from my experience, teams have to be aligned and be working from the same context to be successful. Mistake number 3 is choosing the wrong tools. If you choose a tool that doesn't support a robust, scalable process, you're going to be hitting brick walls. You need something with integration capabilities, especially when scaling to an enterprise level. I've seen this with my clients consistently. They use Linear or Notion for their development team, and eventually they hit a point where they need something more robust and scalable. So why does this cause so much pain? Implementing this wrong will cause massive headaches down the road because it's much easier to implement a solution that works for 10 people and scales to 1,000 when you build it at 10 people. Versus building that same process for 1,000 people when you have to migrate and make all these changes. Your team has a much harder time adopting new tools and processes. There are more people to train rather than them coming in and already adopting new processes that are scalable, robust, and work effectively. I see teams kick the can down the road even though they know it has to change eventually. But the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to implement and change systems later. The sooner you do this, the easier it's going to be. Now, the problem with siloed work is that there's no alignment and no excitement from your team. Nobody knows what the goals are or what they're working towards. Every team that I've worked with that has great culture, even entry-level or junior roles, those individuals are often excited about and know the impact of what they do. And to have that impact, you need goal alignment and work alignment. So at the top level, you align your teams on the goals that they're working on, and then you create initiatives and tasks to execute on these goals. You could also include subtasks or any other level of hierarchy. And then you document all of this information somewhere. Not just goals aligned, but processes documented in a place where others can reference and use them anytime. Every single process breaks down into 2 main buckets. Bucket 1 is intake, and this is how work gets created. This could be a request that comes in either externally or internally, could be a task that gets created, a form that gets filled out, or a backlog item that is generated. And this is critical to get right because it gives you context on what needs to be worked on. And bucket 2 is execution. This is how the work actually gets done. It's how people or teams know what to do next and how to track progress. Let's dive into getting your intake process right. And I'm going to use IT as an example. We're going to need to create a form or a request portal with all of the information IT needs to solve the request. For a broken laptop, the question might be, what specifically is broken? Is it hardware or software related? What laptop do you have? Are any approvals needed for a new purchase? So on and so forth. Now there's a balance you have to strike. Get all of the information from the individuals submitting to the IT team. Now there's a balance you have to strike. You have to collect as much information as possible when getting the ticket submitted, while not overwhelming them and making it so difficult that they won't bother filling out the form. And this applies to any team. If a marketing team is creating a task for a new campaign and there's 36 fields to fill out before a task can be created, it becomes very unlikely that the task gets filled out correctly, consistently, and on time. You don't want to overwhelm the intake process for the end user, but as the individual receiving or working on the request, which in some cases is the same person, you want to collect everything that you need without going back and pulling in more context later. Now let's move on to the execution. The biggest mistake I see teams make is that they don't map out a process before implementing it into their tool set. Teams get a tool, they get excited, they start to play around with it and see what's possible, and then they form their idea of the process and shove it into the tool, forcing the tool to do something that it wasn't built to do. Now this creates a lot of problems. Teams think that the tool isn't capable enough or can't do what they actually want, and they get frustrated because they don't have a real system or process defined. They're trying to figure it out as they go. It's absolutely critical to implement a process before implementing it into your tool set. Here's some of the questions that I like to ask my clients when putting together new processes. What does success look like? What is the end result that you'd like to see from a particular process? You want to first define what that success looks like, ask what the end result would be, and then you work backwards from completion to the very start. Rather than to do in progress done, you start with done and work backwards to understand what needs to get completed, what statuses you need to add, what validation or conditions are we requiring before something is completed, what information will we need to gather before completion, and you work backwards rather than front to back. You want to define each step of the process with your team while keeping it as simple as possible. And the simplest version of this is to do, in progress, and done. And some teams use these three statuses very successfully. Most teams do need more context, information, and workflows, but you want to keep it as simple as possible. The sweet spot is around 5 to 8 total statuses. And my rule of thumb is to have the least amount of statuses possible within your workflow without losing any context or critical information. On average, I've seen teams succeed with between 5 to 8 statuses without losing any context or information, but this really depends on the team. IT teams with change management processes probably need more context, especially with approvals, but most work management teams require roughly 5 to 8 in total. When you start to get to 10, 12, 15, or more, I start to question whether or not those are actually process steps, or if you need to collect certain context that is a subset of a specific status. For development teams, you might have something like testing, UAT, quality assurance, internal testing, external testing. All of these are really a subsection of a testing status. And in some cases, it does make sense to split these out, but often just having one status that encompasses all of these is much simpler and easier for everyone. I like to look at this from a Kanban view. Even if you're not using Kanban methodology, it gives you a different perspective of helping you simplify and work from left to right. On the very right side, that's where the process ends. Every column that you create in this Kanban workflow is a step in the process. When you have a task that moves through this process, you want it to touch every single column in your workflow, going from left to right, and not skipping anything and not moving backwards, unless more information is requested or it's an approval. Once you have your definition of done and you have what success looks like, you want to look into the best practices of the tool you're using. I prefer Jira, which is one of the most flexible tools available for general work management. And from here, you want to understand how work flows, how best to implement this into your process, and we're not trying to shove anything that won't work into the tool. We're creating a process that works inside of your platform. And I'll tell you a really quick story of how this happened with a client. I was working with a team that had several different work types in a single project. They had bugs, they had features, epics, general tasks, and they wanted the ability for anyone to create a bug and only for their internal team to create all of the other work types. Feature requests, epics, everything else needed to be restricted to just their team and associated with just that project. Their team came to me and said, hey, we need to restrict this from being open to anyone. What do you need to do to make this happen? Now, there's really no good way to implement this. There are some workarounds and some ways that we could figure out how to actually make this work inside of Jira, but there's really no good solution or best practice for this. A bad process designer would go into this and say, okay, here's what we could do. It's not pretty, but we could force this into Jira and make it work with very complex automations, validators, third-party apps, which cost more money, and eventually you get something that does work and does get implemented, but it's not an ideal solution, and it's not a great experience, and it costs more. So when I started to dig into this and asking more questions, I understood what the end goal was, which was for external users to create only bug requests. The solution here wasn't to add more restrictions or users. The solution was actually to build something entirely different. The prescription from end users is often wrong. You really want to dig into why something needs to be done and what the reasoning is. What does success look like and what is the ideal solution? So I worked backwards and I understood that this was for external teams that needed to submit bugs. And then they just get a simple task on their board. The solution was to create a very simple form with a work type of bug and then sharing that form with anyone that needs to submit a bug. So rather than adding more permissions, more users, a specific project, more layers and levels of complex validation, we came up with a solution that's a native experience, less complicated, easier, and more beneficial to everyone, including the users submitting the requests, who now have a much easier way of getting to the form and a much better experience of submitting that form. This is why it's critical to understand the definition of done, working backwards from what success looks like and what this needs to look like in a specific platform. What I just walked through is actually a framework that I use with every single client. It's a 5-step process. Step 1 is to question the requirements. Don't take what someone tells you at face value. Dig into the why. What are they actually trying to achieve? And what does success look like? Step 2 is to remove unnecessary process steps. Look at what you've mapped out and ask, do we really need all of these steps? Can we simplify this? Can we combine steps that don't add real value? Step 3 is to optimize. Now that you've simplified, how can we make the remaining steps work better? How can we reduce friction? How can we make sure that the right information flows to the right people at the right time? Step 4 is accelerate. How can you make this faster? Can we eliminate handoffs? Can we reduce approval loops? Can we make decisions happen quicker? And step 5 is to automate. Only after you've done all the other steps should you automate. Automate the notifications, the status changes, the routing, but only once you know the process actually works. Most teams start with automation and wonder why their process is still broken when you've got 4 other steps to do first. The bottom line is that we're not trying to implement something that won't work in this platform based on the ideas that we have. We're going to understand the product, the way that the product was meant to be used, and then implement the best solution we have for it. This may take research, this may take working with a consultant. It's either going to be your time effort or getting someone who's more experienced to help you out with this. You could either spend that time to learn this and figure it out on your own, or you spend the money to hire someone who's done this 100 times, knows exactly what they're doing, and can propose the best solution for you and your team. If you don't do this, there is no platform, no software, no way to implement what you're looking for with your specific scenario. There is no tool that works great on an enterprise level, that is easy to set up and works every single time out of the box when it's more complicated than just a basic to do, in progress, and done. The first step is always to map out your process. Do nothing in the software yet. Understand what success looks like, work backwards from there until you get something that you know is going to work. You build a framework around that, and then you implement it inside your software. Then you standardize and make sure that it's able to scale over time. That's what's actually going to get you a good result. So your challenge this week is to pick one key process in your business and run it through those 5 steps. Question the requirements, remove anything unnecessary, optimize what's left, figure out how to accelerate it, and then automate. Map out your 2 buckets on how work gets created and how work gets done. Work backwards from what success looks like. Figure out those 5 to 8 statuses that you actually need without losing any context. Then, and only then, start building it into your tool. Drop a comment and let me know what process you're going to tackle first. And if you want help building a system that actually scales, we do offer free consultations where we audit your setup and show you exactly what's breaking and how to fix it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.